Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar focused on automated workflows. My name is Anna, and I'm a member of the product marketing team here at Smartsheet. And joining me today, I have Scott Toole from our product management team. And Scott led the team that was responsible for creating these new automated workflow enhancements. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Our learning objectives for today are to focus on understanding the structure of automated workflows to empower you to set up the exact workflows that your team needs, as well as to look at a couple different scenarios in our demo with Scott. So we'll look at how to create multiple scenario workflows, as well as look at how to schedule recurring workflows, which will allow you to set up, let's say, a weekly Monday request for information. Before we dive into our demo today, let's talk about the building blocks for your automated workflows. All of your workflows will consist of three sections: your trigger, your condition, and your action. Your trigger is the activity that must take place in your sheet to kick off your automated workflow. So for example, if you want to be notified anytime that a task in your sheet turns red, so you can make sure to take action on it, you can say, for a trigger, when status becomes red. Your action is what needs to take place in Smartsheet. So when it becomes red, what do you want to happen? You can send an alert just to let somebody know it's becoming red. You can send an update request asking for information about why it's red, so on. And you can see all of the actions on the right side of our screen here. In between your trigger and your action is your condition. So maybe you don't want to be notified about all of the red tasks. Maybe you want to know if a task turns red and the due date is in the next 10 days, those are the ones that are important to you. You can add that 10-day criteria in your condition section. So once you've filled all of these three out, for example, you're going to say, anytime a task turns red in my sheet, and that task's due date is in the next 10 days, let me know with an alert or send an update request to the person responsible for that task. This automated workflow functionality allows you to take multiple actions in a single workflow, which means instead of creating a lot of disjointed rules just to manage one process, you can have a workflow that includes all of your possible scenarios. So as you can see in my screenshot here, you can say, let's kick off an approval request and also dictate what should happen when it's approved and what should happen when it's declined, including all of those possible scenarios in a single workflow. You also have the ability to have multiple conditional paths in a workflow. In other words, if you want to have a different process depending on a specific criteria, you can still include all of that in a single workflow in your sheet. For example, if you're using Smartsheet to manage expenses and you want to have a different approval path depending on your dollar amount, you can still include all of that in a single workflow. For example, you can see in the screenshot here, we have two different paths: the actions that should take place if the expense dollar amount is under 500, and the actions that should take place if the dollar amount is equal to or greater than 500. Again, you can include all of these paths in a single workflow to make it really easy to account for all of the scenarios with one rule. You can also use the automated workflow functionality to view how your actions are connected together. This allows you to get on the same page with your team, make sure everybody understands the full scenario that you're working in. It also makes sure that you can have a process where you're not missing any gaps. In addition to having trigger-based workflows, which kick off when a specific activity takes place in your sheet, you can also have time-based workflows, which allow you to choose a specific date and time, or recurring time-based workflows. For example, if you wanted to request an update on tasks in your sheet every Tuesday at a specific time, you can absolutely kick that off with the recurrence functionality. And using that condition step, you can even make sure that these requests are only going through as long as a task is not complete. So it gives you a lot of power to automate requests for more information, but also making sure you don't have to sign into Smartsheet and turn off these requests when the tasks are done. Today, Scott's going to demo for us a conference attendance request process. Now, we're going to start off with a pretty simple process. We're going to have an employee submit a Smartsheet form to request the ability to go to a conference. We're going to automate an approval request that gets sent to that employee's manager. And then when the manager approves, we're going to alert the employee of that approval. So this is already a multi-step workflow because we have an approval request combined with an alert. There are, of course, opportunities for different paths to take place. For example, let's say we have a dollar threshold of $1,000 where we don't just need the employee's manager's approval, but we actually have to ask for a second approval from HR. We can use our automated workflows to include this approval in a different path. And then we're going to have the same steps. So the employee submits the form, the manager receives their approval request, and then when the manager approves, then another approval request gets sent to HR. When HR approves, the employee is alerted of this approval. This is what Scott is going to demo today, but I'm sure you can see that there's a lot of potential here. So if we needed maybe a third step over a different dollar amount, or maybe over a conference that was a certain number of days, you could absolutely include that in the automated workflow paths that you set up. This is all here so you can use your triggers, conditions, and actions to replicate the exact processes and policies that you have in your team and organization. So Smartsheet's really taking a lot of this work off of your plate, and all of this is going to be managed by the automation in your sheets. Now that we've talked about the scenario and what we're going to be looking at, let's go into our demo. I'm going to hand it off to Scott, and Scott's going to walk through how to actually set this up in your sheet and see all of these triggers, conditions, and actions together.
Thanks, Anna. As Anna mentioned, we're going to go through a scenario here where we will set up two approval requests to handle the case where a request for training is for more than $1,000 or less than $1,000. We will receive approvals from the folks that we need them from based on what our company policies state, and we'll also provide alerts to whoever requested to go to training automatically. And so here you see we have a form. It's very common for a workflow to begin when a form is submitted, and when a form is submitted, it will add a row to our sheet. And so we'll start here and introduce you to this scenario. We have an event name, a location, a cost, and this is an important field, as Anna mentioned, as we're describing, because our conditions are going to determine what happens based on the value of that cost. We have a start and end date, justification to go to the event, and two important roles here. We have the requester, the person who submits the request to go to training, and their manager. And in both these cases, I have provided my own contact information so I can show you every step of the process. So we're not going to submit this form yet, but I wanted to use this to educate you about the process. So now we'll switch over to my sheet. And here on the sheet, you see there are already a number of requests that include those same fields that you saw. And so what we're going to set up is an automated workflow that will obtain approvals for a new training request. So I'll go up here and click on automation. And when I do, I see that familiar dropdown, which Anna mentioned earlier. And we see the options here are for those of you who have used Smartsheet automation in the past, these should be familiar, except now they will create our new automated workflows. So we know that we're going to set up an approval workflow, so we'll select this option. In doing so, we'll bring up our workflow editor. Now the first thing that we can do is name our workflow. And from there, we're going to specify our trigger, conditions, and actions. So we will select when rows are added, because that is what will happen when the form is submitted. And we'll specify that the event name is just not blank. And we know that will be true because it's a required field on the form. And we'll run this workflow right away. We're going to come back to conditions. For now, we know that every single request to go to training or a conference, independent of cost, goes to the manager. And I have the ability to specify who the recipient is of this approval. It can be a specific person, but in this case, we're going to use that role, the requester's manager. So there we go. So whatever contact information is in the requester manager field for the given row, that is where this approval request is going to go. And next we see that the status of that approval, the actual outcome of the decision, will be stored in a new column which is being added to our sheet called requester manager approval. And then below that, I have the ability to customize a message. We'll get into that in a little bit. It is a best practice to customize messages, but for now, let's keep moving. So if the manager approves, then now is when we need to introduce our condition, because if the dollar amount of the conference is more than $1,000, then there needs to be a subsequent approval. In this scenario, our company requires our HR director to provide that approval. So we'll start by saying we'll handle that case. So when cost is greater than $1,000, then I want to send another approval. And so I will pick request an approval. And in this case, we're not going to send this approval to a field because we didn't capture the HR director in the form, and we didn't need to. The HR director is one specific person, and so we'll use this option to send that to Paul Finley, our HR director. Now let's go set up our other condition. We can use the otherwise capability here, and this allows us to very quickly say, okay, in any case that is not specified by this condition, then fire a particular action. But what I want to show you is add a new condition path. This allows me to be specific, and I can say, all right, in this case, if cost is less than or equal to $1,000, we see these don't overlap, then I'm going to send an alert. So let's just recap that really quick. A request came in, the manager approved it. You see we're using the if approved outcome. We haven't talked about declined yet. If they approve it and the cost is more than $1,000, then send another approval. If they approve it and the cost is less than or equal to $1,000, then we're going to send an alert to a specific person, and of course that is the person who submitted the request, and we'll let them know your training or conference request is approved. And so now we should also handle the case where the training is for more than $1,000 and it is approved both by the manager and our HR director. And so we'll add an alert here as well. And we'll send it to the employee who submitted the request. And of course, you would go and customize the message there as well. So let's also talk about the scenario where the request is not approved. Say, for example, the manager says, no, unfortunately, this is not approved. You need to provide additional justification, and they can provide a comment that indicates that. Well, we can actually handle that case in this workflow as well. We can click on the if declined outcome, and we can add an action. And that action could be to request an update. Now, an update request is similar to an approval request. An approval request sends the row to the approver and allows them to click the approve or decline button to indicate their decision. An update request sends the row to a person, and that person then has the ability to edit the fields on the row, whichever fields are included in the request. So in this case, we would say send to whoever submitted the request and say additional justification needed. And of course, we could set up an update request to handle the case where the HR director declined, but I think you get the idea here. Very easily, we've set up a number of actions and handled a range of conditions in our workflow. And this is now something that I can show to my coworkers, and we can collaborate on it together. We can see what is set up. We can improve the messages that are being sent. We can handle additional scenarios if we need to. It's all ready for us. So I'm going to go ahead and save this one. And once it saves, we'll see it show up here, summarized for us very simply in the Automation Manager, and we can quickly submit it. So remember that we have a form here ready to be filled out. So I'm going to submit this form and you will see a request come into myself. So we'll come back over to the sheet. And in just a moment, we get the indication that there's a change that's happened. So here we see that new request that's just come in. And in another moment, and we see our new columns that our workflow added. In another moment, we'll see an update here requesting approval from the manager. So we saw that status changed to submitted, which is great. And again, I sent this to myself. And so here I can open the approval request and show you the contents of the request, which of course I can approve or decline. So there's another scenario that we want to handle here, and this is going to use recurrence. Recurrence is a kind of time-based workflow that repeats, and it will run on the schedule that you tell it to run. So let's say we have another process that we want to set up on this sheet, which will remind or request an update, more specifically, from the approver if they haven't taken action. And we want to do that once a week. With recurrence, this is really easy to do. So once again, I will come here to my automation menu and say that we want to request an update. Of course, we could alert the person that they need to take action, or we could request action from them directly. So let's do that. I'll request an update, and we'll say this is a recurring request to provide conference or training approval. So we're going to pick the when a date is reached trigger. And when we do that, we see that we could run this workflow on a particular date or a date in a date field. But in this case, actually, we want it to recur. So we'll click on run once and then custom. And now we see our recurrence window. And I have the option to have this recur on a daily, weekly, monthly, or annual pattern. And in this case, we want weekly, and we'd like it to run on every Tuesday. And we can choose to have it run a certain number of times or end on a particular date. In this case, we'll just let it run. And so now we see that summarized. And we'll have it send at 10 a.m. That's a nice time of day to get a reminder, I think. And we want this to handle the case where the approval has been submitted, but no action has been taken. And as you saw, when the approval went out to myself, the status changed to submitted. And so we know that is the state where action is needed. And so we'll come down here to requester manager approval. So that's their approval status. And we'll say if the approval is in the submitted state, then we want to request an update from the manager, right? Because that's their status field and that is the person. So now we can give them a custom message that says, please provide a decision on training or conference approval requests. Now the manager will be able to actually provide their approval decision right here. They can still edit the approval status field in our update request, and we control which fields are included in the request with advanced options. So that handles the case where the requester manager hasn't taken action. What about our HR director? Well, we can handle that scenario as well. So I'll add a condition path and say, okay, where the requester manager has approved, but Paul Finley hasn't, it's still in the submitted state, then we want to request an update from Paul. And we provide the same information there. Now this will run every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and it will run for all of the rows that match these conditions. And in that way, we don't have to remember to go remind Paul or the managers to take action. We don't have to pester them with email or any other carrot or stick method that you want. The recurring update request will handle all of that for us. So we can go focus on doing more important work. And that is our overview of recurrence when partnered with a multi-step approval process.
Thanks for that demo, Scott. Now, to review what we just saw in action, we saw an automated workflow where we used a Smartsheet form to submit a request. In our scenario, we were requesting the ability to attend a conference, but this is widely applicable. Anywhere from something simple like requesting time off, requesting conferences, etc., all the way to something as complex to requesting a new project or requesting budget or requesting sales exceptions. There's a lot of scenarios that you can use forms and approvals for, and Smartsheet's going to help you by taking a lot of the manual babysitting of these tasks off of your plate. We'll automate the approvals, we'll automate the alerts, reminders, and so on. In our scenarios, we had a couple different conditional paths, so we could dictate exactly what the requirements were depending on the cost of the conference. You can make this condition anything. So we were conditioning our paths based on the dollar amount that was being requested, but you can automate this based on the person, based on a manager, really based on any column value in your sheet. And then, of course, we looked at how to expand this. So, this has the potential to have the paths that you need to replicate your processes and policies directly in your Smartsheet automated workflows. Along with the ongoing approvals, we also took care of some of those approvals that might get missed. There's always going to be someone who might have forgotten an approval. Maybe they were out of the office and it slipped by. And you can also use Smartsheet recurring automation to request updates for any tasks that haven't been completed. So in this case, every Tuesday morning, for example, we can send out a list of all of the approvals that are pending both to the manager and to the HR approver to make sure that anything that got missed would be reevaluated on Tuesday. Now we have some time left today for Q&A. One of the common questions that we've seen since automated workflows are a new UI for Smartsheet automation is whether there's anything that you need to do to convert from the automation you previously had to a new workflow. Scott?
Great question. Fortunately, those are all of those pre-existing automation rules. Anything that was created before automated workflows was released, those will be automatically migrated for you. And so when you go and look at them now, they will look like automated workflows. And the thing I would point out there is that you have the ability to combine those individual rules into more powerful, more easily understood workflows. And when you can do that, then when you do that, you can go disable or remove the old single action rule equivalents that are left over.
Well, that's great news. It sounds like everyone can hit the ground running, turning their existing automation into a more cohesive workflow, combining multiple automations together. Another question we've had a couple times is for multiple approvals, do you need to create a separate column for each approval as you did in your demo? Or can you have a single column where each approver makes updates?
Yes, good question. And you saw by default, Smartsheet will go and add a column based on whoever the recipient is of the approval. And so we saw a manager approval status column and then Paul Finley's approval status column. You do have the ability to control which column approval statuses are stored in. And so I could have actually gone and created one master approval status column with like manager approval as a value, HR director approval, and then HR director declined, HR director submitted, so on and so forth. And that way I could use one single column. The constraint is just that I need to use different values for each approval request. So my manager approval request and my HR director approval request can't have the same submitted, approved, or declined drop-down values in that status field. They need to be distinct.
Got it. Okay, so that just means add an additional custom drop-down value for each person, but you can use the same column or you can choose to split it up across multiple columns. Another question that I hear a lot is how do you get people to participate? So you can create the best process in Smartsheet, but you do want to make sure that you have the right amount of communication and that people are reading your emails and completing your update and approval requests. Scott, do you have any tips in that area?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's something that is very dear to my heart because it is important that we're able to if we're going to automate work, then we need the recipients of an alert or a request to be able to take action. They need to have all the information required, and they need to be able to trust the information they've been given. And so a key thing that you can do is to customize the message and the subject of any message that you're sending on a Smartsheet. Make it your own, so it is more representative of something coming from you. In addition, there's the capability to use message subject placeholders. Message subject placeholders allow you to reference the value of a cell in the sheet and populate that into the subject or the message body of an alert or request. And that will allow you to even further personalize, customize the message that's being sent to make it even more applicable and easier for the recipient. It makes it easier for them to understand the nature of the information that is being sent to them, either whether it's an alert telling them that of an important update or a request asking them to take action.
And another one that I would add that I've seen work is to make sure that you're sending these at the right cadence. So if you're sending an email alert or update request every single time that a change is made in a sheet, people are probably going to stop paying attention. But you can actually set your automations to go through every hour, even once a day, to summarize the changes that have happened in that time period. So less emails will have more impact, and that's one additional thing to consider. We have come to the end of our time. So again, Scott, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks everyone for joining, and we hope to see you next time.